mid-century vaccine experiments, researchers inoculated subjects with pathogens they had weakened or killed in hopes of conferring immunity without symptoms. If a vaccine caused illness, investigators stopped the human trial and returned to the laboratory. In the hepatitis studies referred to here, the pathogens were unmodified and fully virulent. The predictable outcome of these experiments would be to cause a serious illness, not prevent it. Even knowing about dangerous experiments in the country's past, I was stunned and perplexed. Stunned that researchers had exposed subjects to risks so much greater than what was acceptable in routine vaccine trials, and perplexed that healthy people had agreed to participate in studies that promised them harm without benefit. In the months after discovering the waiver forms, I began hunting for additional materials on the hepatitis infection experiments. I soon realized that Stokes's work with hepatitis was part of a large-scale U.S. government-sponsored program of virus transmission studies that spanned World War II and the early Cold War. As I located more records, unraveling questions about the invasive hepatitis studies became a mission. How did the research program begin? What allowed it to continue for decades? How did scientists justify the study's hazards, and how did they manage to gain access to subjects? Who were the enrollees, and what happened to them? And what, finally, brought the experiments to a close? Pursuing answers, I sought out informants for in-person interviews and pored over oral histories, newspaper articles, scientific reports, and documents from dozens of libraries and archival repositories. The search took me from Illinois to Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Michigan, Virginia, Texas, and California. My most frequent destination was the Washington, D.C. area, where I made repeated trips to collections at the National Academy of Sciences and the National Library of Medicine. I lost count of my visits to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where I spent months combing through the records of federal agencies. What I unearthed reveals the inner workings of federally sponsored human experimentation in mid-century America and the political and cultural developments that shaped its conduct. Among the findings are that, with funding and approvals from government agencies, elite scientists pursued disease-inducing studies with members of multiple institutionalized and disadvantaged groups, raising troubling questions about inequities in the conduct of biomedical research. I also discovered a trail of unanticipated and unaddressed injuries. Hepatitis investigators insisted that knowledge from their studies was critical for advancing disease prevention. They recognized the immediate danger of fatalities their interventions posed, yet declared that subjects were either benefiting from participation or were freely choosing to make sacrifices for the common good. While the experiments were ongoing, researchers were aware that some people infected with blood-borne hepatitis retained the viruses, but investigators did not realize that many who failed to clear these pathogens would experience serious delayed harm. What scientists unwittingly did was create a pool of hepatitis carriers at risk for slowly simmering, life-threatening liver diseases. The titanic global health emergency unleashed by COVID-19 has galvanized new calls for extremely hazardous human research. In spring of 2020, within weeks of the pandemic's arrival in the United States, well-placed commentators were advocating human infection studies with the novel coronavirus. In March and April of 2021, two groups of British researchers working separately announced the launch of human transmission procedures with SARS-CoV-2. Proponents have argued that such experiments will hasten understanding of how the disease spreads.